Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's do some prayers before our class. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhur Swaha, Tat Savitra Varenayam, Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Naha Prachodayat, Asto Ma Sadgamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, मृत्योर्मा अमृतम गम्य ओम सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ओम शांति 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 ओम. Let's open our Uddhava Gita books. Page number 637, chapter 21. Lord Krishna's instructions on the process of a deity worship. In this chapter, the Supreme Personality of Godhead explains the process of deity worship. Worshipping the deity form of the Supreme Lord purifies the mind and awards one satisfaction. Indeed, it is the source of all desirable gains. One who does not engage himself in worshipping the deity will certainly remain attracted to material sense gratification. And he will have no scope for giving up bad association. In the Shatvat scriptures, the Supreme Lord has given instructions on the process of worshipping him as the deity. Brahma, Shiva, Narad, Vyasa, and all other sages have recommended this process as being most beneficial for the members of all varans and ashrams, including women and Shudras. There are three varieties of archana or deity worship based on either the original Vedas, the secondary tantras, or a combination of these. The deity form, the ground, fire, the sun, water, and the heart of the worshipper are all places where the deity can be present. The deity that is to be worshipped may be made of any one of the 8 substances: stone, wood, metal, clay, paint, sand, drawn upon the ground, the mind, or jewels. We saw that in Narad Bhakti Sutra also. So different ways the deities are made. These categories are further subdivided into 2: temporary and permanent. The details of the worshipping process are as follows. The devotee should bathe both physically and by chanting mantras, and then utter the Gayatri mantra or the prescribed junctures of the day. He should arrange a seat facing either east or north, or else directly facing the deity, and should bathe the deity. He should then decorate the deity with clothing and ornaments, sprinkle water on the vessels and other paraphernalia to be used for the worship, and offer water for bathing the deity's lotus feet. Argya. Water for washing his mouth, fragrant oils, incense, lamps, flowers, and food preparations. After this, one should worship the Lord's personal servants and bodyguards, his consort, his energies, and the spiritual masters by chanting their respective mool mantras. The worshipper should recite prayers from the Puranas and other scriptures, offer obeisance by falling flat onto the ground. Falling flat is when we do the Dandvat Pranam. Beg for the Lord's benediction and accept the remnants of the Lord's flower garlands. Included in this method of deity worship are the proper installation of the deity and the construction of a temple, and also the conducting of processions and other festivals. By worshipping Lord Shri Hari with unconditional devotion in this manner, one is sure to advance toward pure, loving service to his lotus feet. But if one steals things that had been given for the service of the deity or the Brahmans, whether given by himself or by others, he will have to take his next birth as a stool-eating worm. So now we see this chapter starting with Uddhav's question. Kriya yogam samachashva bhavat daradhanam prabho yasmat tvam ye yathacharyanti satvata satva rishabha. Shri Uddhav said, O Lord, please describe the procedures for worshipping you in your form as the deity in the temple. What qualifications must a devotee possess to worship you in this way? And what are the rules and regulations to be observed? And we all know that deity worship is so prominent in the temples. In our homes also, we worship the deities. So in this chapter, Lord Krishna gives instructions to Uddhava about the principles of deity worship, its ingredients, the various deity forms, and the rules and regulations that are to be observed by the worshippers. The Lord had previously said, it is very rare to find one who is attached to his wife and children, that is trying to cultivate devotional service in the association of saintly persons. With this in mind, Uddhav inquired about deity worship as prescribed in the Vedas literature. Verse number 2. Etat vadanti munyo muhur nishreyasam nrinam nardo bhagwan vyasam acharyo angi rasahasuta. All the great sages such as Narad Muni, Vyasadev, and Brihaspati, the spiritual masters of the demigods, have declared that such worship is supremely beneficial for all members of human society. Number 3 and 4 go together. Nisritam te mukhambhojad yad bhagwan aja putrebhyo भृगु मुख्येभ्यो दैव्ये च भगवान भवा एतत्वे सर्वः वर्णनाम आश्मनाम च सम्मतम श्रेयसाम उत्तमम मन्ये स्त्री शूद्रानाम च मानद. O most magnanimous Lord, you first gave instructions on the process of deity worship to Lord Brahma. Then they were passed on by him to his sons, headed by Bhrigu, and Lord Shiv instructed his wife Parvati. Therefore, I consider that worship of you in your form as the deity is the best spiritual practice for the members of all the varans and ashrams, even for women and shudras. The glories of worshipping the deity form of the Supreme Lord is herein being described. So anybody and everybody should do the worship, the puja, archana. एतत् कमल पत्राक्ष करम बंध विमोचनम भगताये चा अनुरक्ताहे ब्रूहि विश्वेश्वरेश्वरम. O lotus-eyed one, see, Uddhava is still speaking. O Lord of the demigods, please explain to me, your surrendered servant, this process by which one can be delivered from the bondage of material existence. See, that is our goal, to cut this bondage of Maya. The Lord might question Uddhava, you are my surrendered devotee and are attached to me in love. And so, what is the need for your knowing about deity worship? Uddhava might answer, I am concerned for the welfare of all living entities. So, sometimes the saints, they ask the questions for the welfare of others, even though they know the answer. Therefore, kindly reveal the glories of this process to your surrendered servant. When one engages in the service of the Lord, renouncing all sense of false proprietorship, if one acts without desiring to enjoy the fruits of his work, he is to be considered a pure devotee. So it's like a Nishkam Bhagat. However, as long as one remains within this world, embodied by gross and subtle coverings, one's nature born of the interactions of the three modes of material nature remains prominent. In the material condition of life, which is temporary, full of ignorance, and thoroughly miserable, one considers himself to be the doer of all activities, being bound by his false ego. Only by receiving instructions from a pure devotee of the Lord can one give up the materialistic conception of life. When, under the instruction of the spiritual master, one dovetails his designated existence in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is one without a second, the false conception of being the enjoyer of nature gradually diminishes. In order to gain relief from the materialistic conception of life, which consists of the knower of matter, material knowledge, and the object of material knowledge, one must engage in the service of the Supreme Lord. When non-devotees who are fully absorbed in the mundane conception of life become inclined toward the service of the Supreme Lord and his devotees, then, as they surrender unto the Supreme Lord and his dear devotees, they can realize the transcendental nature of a devotional service. So, with the help of this bhakti, the deity worship, we become less and less attached to the Maya and more and more attachment to the God. So, even though God is everywhere, but we don't see, but in the deity, in the form, we see God. So, when we see God in the form and doing all those archanas, bathing, feeding, giving the seat, offering the flowers, offering the incense. So slowly we start seeing God. So first in the deity, then we start seeing God everywhere else too. This is what he's telling us. Now Lord Krishna answers this question of Uddhav in verse number 6. Na hi anto nanant parasye karam kandasye cha Uddhav Sankit saptam Varaneshyami Yathavad Anupurvashaha. The Supreme Lord said, My dear Uddhava, the procedures prescribed in the Karam Kand sections of the Vedic literature are innumerable. And so I shall explain this subject to you briefly from the beginning. And that is true. In the Karam Kand sections of the Vedas, there are countless ways to do the worship of Lord. There are innumerable Vedic methods of worship or archana prescribed in the Karam Kand sections of the Vedas. All religious, ritualistic activities and worldly activities that are performed with the aim of attaining material enjoyment or dry renunciation must be considered as perishable activities. In this material world, there are countless methods employed for sense gratification and renunciation. Similarly, in the spiritual world of Vaikuntha, there are an unlimited variety of pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There are innumerable prescriptions given in the Karam Kand section of the Vedas dealing with material enjoyment and renunciation. Vedikas tantrikoho mishrehe iti metri vidhomaka treyanam ipsite ev vidnama smacharet. There are three methods for worshipping me: Vedic, Tantric, and mixed. One should select the method that is suited for him and then worship me according to the prescribed rules and regulations. The Vedic method of worshipping the Supreme Lord is by chanting the prescribed mantras. The Tantric method of worshipping the Supreme Lord is by reciting the mantras such as the 18 syllable mantras that are given in literature, such as the Gautamiya Tantra. Utilization of both literatures is the mixed way of worshipping the Supreme Lord. One should choose the method that is suitable for one's condition of life. There are three methods of performing sacrifice. Materialistic people are generally unwilling to perform sacrifice because of their duplicitous nature and their strong desire to enjoy material happiness. Sacrifice for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord is performed according to the Vedic injunctions, or those described in the Pancharatra, the Vedic Panchratrika, and a combination of both are the three methods to properly worship the Supreme Lord. Verse number 8. यदा स्वनिगमेन उक्तं द्विजवतं प्राप्य पुरुषः यथा यजेत मां भक्त्या श्रद्धया तन् निबोध में. This is verse number 8. Now please listen faithfully as I explain to you how one who has become twice born by observing the relevant Vedic prescriptions should worship me with devotion. Okay, so Dvij, twice born, who has taken the initiation. There are particular Vedic injunctions relevant to one's social and occupational status. Members of the Brahman, Kshatriya, and Vaishya communities achieve the status of twice born by initiation into the Gayatri Mantra. In this chapter, the Supreme Lord explains how such a person should worship him with faith and devotion. Vedic scriptures are divided into two categories, Ekayan and Bhavayan. One must receive initiation into the practices of one of these two categories and then faithfully worship the Supreme Lord, which culminates in achievement of life's ultimate goal and attainment of love for God. The process of worship that is performed when one is still in the bodily conception of life, considering himself to be the enjoyer of this material world, is called Archana. Without being twice born by undergoing the purificatory rituals, it is not possible to worship the Supreme Lord properly. When one makes such an attempt, the result is that he either remains a sense enjoyer or becomes a dry renunciate after giving up much worship. Those who observe the Vedic purificatory processes or the Panchratrika purificatory processes undergo second birth in the Ekayan category. One cannot become twice born if he is blinded by intense desires for material enjoyment. Therefore, it is essential for one to undergo second birth by following the prescribed rules and regulations of the Vedic literature. There are three types of birth. Shakra or seminal, so Vitreha or becoming twice born, or Dakshas or spiritual initiation. The material body, which is produced by the combined effort of the father and mother, can be sanctified by undergoing the appropriate purificatory rituals. In this way, one becomes eligible to rise to the platform of transcendental bliss. False ego, which checks the flow of transcendental happiness and which is born of ignorance, is indicative of a seminal birth. Devotional service is awakened within the heart only after one takes initiation from a bona fide spiritual master. The object of worship, pure devotional service, and unalloyed devotees, these three exist eternally in a state of full knowledge and bliss, and such a condition becomes manifest when one develops firm faith in the instructions of the spiritual master. It is at this point that one can begin the process of worship as described in this chapter. The Vedic sanskaras are considered complete when one undergoes the Pancharatrika sanskaras. Otherwise, simply by performing the rituals of the Karam Kand sections of the Vedas, one cannot rise above the influence of the three modes of material nature. Verse number 9. Archyam sthandilam gno vasurye vapsu hridi dvija dravyen bhakti yuktoho rachet swagurum mam amamya. A twice born person should sincerely worship me, his worshipable Lord, by offering appropriate paraphernalia in a loving devotion to my deity form, or to my form appearing upon the ground, in fire, in the sun, in water, or within his heart. The word Archa refers to the deity of the Supreme Lord. When the eternal soul misuses his minute independence, he is placed within the material nature and accepts temporary material bodies, one after another. The absolute truth possesses two principles, aparaprakriti and paraprakriti. The aparaprakriti manifests the visible universe with five gross material elements. The three modes of material nature engage the living entities in activities of the gross and the subtle bodies, and by covering their knowledge, keep them far from the paraprakriti. Without understanding of the characteristics of the Lord's superior nature, the conditioned souls reside in the material world as sense enjoyers or false renunciates. It is only by the mercy of the Supreme Lord or his pure devotee that a conditioned soul can understand how he is being manipulated by the three material modes, and that only the Supreme Lord has the ability to liberate him from the clutches of the material nature. With such an understanding, one realizes the complete futility of trying to become liberated from the insurmountable material energy by relying upon one's limited senses and polluted mind. The spiritual master also belongs to the marginal potency of the Supreme Lord, but he is empowered to deliver the conditioned souls by engaging them in devotional service. The spiritual master is the incarnation of the Lord's mercy, and as such, he is considered to be the external manifestation of the Supersoul. By his instructions and personal examples, he inspires the conditioned souls to renounce their foolish endeavors of lording it over the material energy of the Supreme Lord, which only awards them varieties of miserable conditions. The spiritual master engages the disciple in the worship of the deity of the Lord because it is the practical way to employ their mind and senses in devotional service. The word Archa refers to the incarnation of the Supreme Lord's mercy. It is one of the five eternal manifestations of the Lord that is comprehensible for the conditioned soul. Those who are neophytes in devotional service, who still cling to the bodily concept of life, can easily be purified when they are engaged in the worship of the deity in the temple. So sometimes we wonder, what is the benefit of worshipping? It purifies us. Purifies. So we got to see that whether our mind gets purified or not. A particular place that has been purified by the chanting of mantras is called Sathandila, fire. The sun, water, and the heart of the living entity are also places for worshipping the Supreme Lord. Although Lord Vishnu is one, he is present in different forms. He appears as the deity and becomes worshipable Lord for the neophyte devotees. Neophyte devotees are recommended to become attached to deity worship. By serving the Supreme Lord in this manner, they utilize all kinds of paraphernalia for his service, rather than considering such things to be material and thus meant for their enjoyment. Gradually, while engaging in the worship of the deity under the direction of the spiritual master, a new devotee will be elevated to the platform of Madhyama Adhikari. Okay, so first we are starting out, then increasing the love for God and detaching from the world, we become Madhyam Adhikari. At this time, the devotee becomes more concerned with reviving his transcendental ras instead of cultivating the 5 kinds of mundane ras, knowing the Supreme Lord of the reservoir of all ras. At this kind of advancement, one is fit to understand the purport of this verse from the Padma Puran. O descendants of Bharat, the holy names of Lord Vishnu are always vibrating on the tongue of one who had previously worshipped Lord Vasudeva with faith and devotion for hundreds of lifetimes. So that means it takes a long time to reach there, but we all need to reach there. So we got to just start where we are. One who is advanced in devotional service does not consider the Lord to be an order supplier. Such a second-class devotee offers his love to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is a sincere friend to all the devotees of the Lord, shows mercy to ignorant people who are innocent, and disregards those who are envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they don't argue, they don't put anybody down. As the devotee makes advancement in devotional service, he can come to realize that the mantras he is chanting are not like the mundane vibrations of this material world. When his absorption in devotional service becomes complete, so that there no longer remains any scope for engagement in sense gratification, the devotee comes to the platform of first-class devotional service as a Maha Bhagavat, becoming thus liberated from the clutches of the Lord's external energy. The devotee realizes his original constitutional relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which is paramount to seeing the Lord face to face. So we can see, sometimes we wonder, why don't we see God? We got to increase the heat of the love for God to be able to see God face to face. The spiritual master is on the same platform as the Supreme Lord, who is the maintainer of the universe and the destroyer of the conditioned soul's false spirit of enjoyment. Being one in interest with the Lord, the spiritual master is known as the dearest servant of the Lord. So Guru is always the servant of God, even though there's no difference between the Guru and God, but Guru always thinks that I'm the servant of the God. Enviousness will surely arise within the heart of a person who considers the spiritual master to be a mortal human being. If such a misconception is not indulged in, however, by the mercy of the Lord, one will perceive how the spiritual master is non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there's no difference between God and God's servant, who's the Guru. If we can't see God in a Guru, that means our eyes are still closed towards this higher knowledge. Verse number 10. Purvam sananam prakurvit dhyot dando angah shuddhye ubher api shananam mantraram mrid grih adina. First, one should clean his teeth and bathe. So now he is giving the instructions. Then a second cleansing of the body should be performed by smearing it with earth and chanting mantras from both the Vedas and Tantras. One can also bathe by chanting Vedic and Tantric mantras. By the recitation of prescribed mantras, the contamination of considering oneself to be the enjoyer of nature can be purified. So this is recommended that when we take shower also, mundane activity we do, recite the mantras at that time too. You are cleaning yourself. Verse number 11. Sandhyopasadhyadi karmani vede nachuditani me pujam te kalpiyet samyak sankalpaha karma pavanema. Concentrating the mind on me. One should worship me by the performance of his prescribed duties, such as chanting the Gayatri Mantra 3 times a day. Such performances are enjoined by the Vedas and they purify the worshipper of all reactions of karmas. So duties we must do. Performance of our prescribed duties. One should engage in the worship of the Supreme Lord by following the rules and regulations enjoined by the scriptures. This will purify one's existence and free one from the bondage of fruitive activities. After completing one's prescribed duties, such as the chanting of mantras, which are enjoined by the Vedas, one should engage in the worship of the Supreme Lord. As soon as one abandons the materialistic propensity for sense enjoyment, by strengthening his resolve to worship Lord Hari, one becomes freed from the bondage of karma. Verse number 12. Shaili, Daru, Mai, Lohi, Lepya, Lekhya, Ch Sakti, Manomai, Manimai, Pratimashitya, Vidyaha Samritaha. The deity form of the Lord appears in 8 varieties. Ashtavida. Stone, wood, metal, earth, paint, sand, the mind, and jewels. This is the verdict of the scriptures. The different kinds of deities are being described in this verse. The word Shali means a deity made of stone. The word Lohi indicates a deity made of metal, such as gold. Actual worship of the Supreme Lord begins when one gives up all attempts at mental speculation on the strength of the transcendental instructions received from the spiritual master and thus renounces the materialistic conception that the Supreme Lord is the object of one's enjoyment. For the benefit of such a devotee, the Lord appears in 8 varieties of forms. The supreme form is always prepared to fulfill the desires of his devotees, as long as they will not cause him to fall into a miserable condition of life. It is only for the benefit of the neophyte devotees that the Lord appears in these 8 forms. However, one should never make the mistake of considering the deity of the Lord to be made of material elements, such as marble or brass. Such a mentality is certainly suitable for placing one on the path to hell. Unless one receives initiation from a spiritual master coming in disciplic succession, it is not possible to understand the transcendental nature of Lord Vasudeva, and for that reason, the 8 kinds of deities may appear mundane to the imperfect senses of the conditioned soul. Such a misunderstanding is indicative of the ignorance that is caused by the controlling power of Maya. So it's not the form or the object which the deity is made of. It's not a jewel is more important than the sand. God is everywhere, no matter which object we are seeing the God in. Chala chaleti dvividha pratishtaha jeev mandiram udvasa vahane na satah sthirayam Uddhava Archane. My dear Uddhav, the deity form of the Lord, who is the shelter of all living entities, can be established in 2 ways, movable or immovable. A permanent deity, having been installed, can never be sent away or immersed in a body of water. The Supreme Lord is directly present as the deity. He is also present within the temple of the living entity's heart. Indeed, he is the shelter of all living entities. An example of his stationary form is Lord Jagannath in Puri, and an example of his moving form is child Krishna. Materialistic persons of whatever stripe consider the Lord to be their order supplier, and so they make temporary arrangements for religious ceremonies to achieve temporary material sense gratification. This temporary mode of worship is favored by those desiring to exploit the personality of Godhead for their personal ends, whereas the loving devotees in Krishna consciousness eternally engage in worship of the personality of Godhead. They install permanent deities meant to be worshipped perpetually. The devotees of the Lord installed the deity form of their worship of Lord in two different ways, temporary and permanent. However, there's no procedure for inviting and then immersing the permanent form of the Supreme Lord. These deities are permanently installed, and their worship goes on perpetually. Invoking and then immersing the deity is the practice of materialists who want to explicit or exploit the Supreme Lord for the fulfillment of their personal ambitions. So, what he's talking about the Sakam Bhakti, that you invite God to fulfill your materialistic desires. The impersonalists regard the eternal form of the Lord as a temporary manifestation created by the illusory energy Maya. In fact, they regard the deity as a mere stepping stone in their ambitious endeavor to become God. Let's look at one more verse. अस्थिरायं विकल्पः स्यात् स्थण्डिलेः तु भवेत् द्वयम् स्वप्नं तु अविलेपायायम् अन्यत्र परिमार्जनम्. The deity that is temporarily established can be invited and sent away. But these two rituals should always be performed when the deity is traced upon the ground. The deity should be bathed with water, except if the deity is made of clay, paint, or wood, in which cases a thorough cleansing without water is enjoined. So that means you just wipe it with a cloth, because if you apply water, you can damage it. One may invoke and then immerse a deity made of sand from a river bank or painted or desired. However, the Shaligram Shila should never be immersed. Invocation and immersion is recommended for deities made of earth or clay, as well as or sand, except for paintings of the Lord and deities made of clay or sandalwood. All the other deities should be bathed with water. The deities of clay or wood should be carefully cleansed without the use of water. There is no need for one to waste so many ingredients for worship if he considers the deity of Lord Vishnu to be made of stone. The deities that are painted or made from clay should not be bathed with water. Wiping with a dry cloth to remove the dust is sufficient. So these rituals we go through, we got to use our own intellect also. Ultimately, what are we trying to do? We are trying to clean ourselves, clean our mind, okay, so that we can visualize God, whether the deity is in the form of wood or a stone or any other metal. Okay, so cleaning our mind is more important. So let's stop it here. Next week we'll start with verse number 15. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Visheshyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much.